The night I found out, I was regrouting the bathroom tiles in our master bath while my wife was supposedly at a team dinner downtown. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my days calculating load tolerances, stress points, failure thresholds. I can tell you exactly how much pressure a beam can take before it buckles. What I couldn't calculate was how long I'd been carrying a marriage that was already structurally compromised. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 49 years old, and I spent 21 years believing I was building something solid. The grout gun was still in my hand when her phone lit up on the bathroom counter. She'd left it charging there. Something she never did anymore. For the past 8 months, that phone had been attached to her like a third hand. But tonight, she'd rushed out, distracted, and there it sat. I wasn't going to look. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of man who goes through his wife's phone. I never had been. But the screen lit up with a preview I couldn't unsee, even from 3 feet away. Miss you already. Tonight was perfect. Same time Thursday, the sender's name was saved as Paula W.H.R. My wife doesn't work in HR. She's a senior architect at a commercial development firm. And Paula from HR doesn't send texts like that at 10:45 on a Tuesday night. I set the grout gun down very carefully. I wiped my hands on my work jeans. And I did something I'd never done before in 21 years of marriage. I picked up her phone. His name was Garrett. I know that because once I saw the first message, I kept scrolling, and the contact saved as Paula W.H.R. had sent her a photo 2 weeks earlier. A man, maybe 38, good-looking in the way that comes easy when you're young and haven't had to fight for anything yet, smiling at the camera like the world owed him that smile. Her replies made my stomach drop through the floor. I put the phone back exactly where it was. I went downstairs, poured 2 fingers of scotch, and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there while 21 years rearranged themselves in my memory. She came home at 11:30. I heard her heels on the hardwood, heard her drop her keys in the dish by the door, heard her call out, "Frank, you still up?" "In the kitchen," I said. She appeared in the doorway, still in her work dress, hair slightly looser than when she'd left. She looked at me sitting there in the dark and something crossed her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like a quick internal calculation. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" "Just thinking." "Okay." She went to the cabinet for a glass of water. "You finished the bathroom?" "Almost." I watched her move around the kitchen like I was watching a stranger. My wife of 21 years, mother of my son, the woman who used to fall asleep reading architecture journals and wake up talking about cantilever designs. When had she become someone I didn't recognize? "How was dinner?" I asked. "Fine, long, you know how those things go." I did know. That was the thing. I knew exactly how those things went because for years I'd been the one coming home late from job sites and client dinners, and she'd always ask me the same question with the same tired patience. We'd built a whole language of comfortable lies without either of us noticing. "Get some sleep," I said. "I'll be up." She kissed me on the top of my head and went upstairs. I sat there another hour before I moved. I didn't confront her that night, or the next morning, or the week after that. People who've never been in a situation don't understand the paralysis. It's not weakness. It's the engineering problem of it. You've identified a structural failure, but you need to understand the full scope of the damage before you start tearing down walls. Tear down the wrong wall at the wrong time, and the whole thing collapses on you. So I started documenting. I know that sounds cold, but I'm a methodical person, always have been. My wife used to tease me about it. Frank makes a spreadsheet for everything. She wasn't wrong. And now that precision was the only thing keeping me functional. I set up a separate email account. I started quietly noting dates, times, the small inconsistencies that I'd been too trusting to register before. The Thursday client meetings that never produced any client. The weekend site visit 3 months ago when I tried to reach her for 2 hours and gotten voicemail. The way her phone now went everywhere with her, including the bathroom. I also called my college friend, a family law attorney named Stuart. Not to file anything. Just to understand my options. Just to know what the landscape looked like from a legal standpoint before I walked into it blind. Stuart asked me one question that changed how I thought about everything. "Does she know you know?" "No." "Keep it that way until you're ready. Knowledge is the only leverage you have right now." 6 weeks after I found that text message, I had a clearer picture. The relationship with Garrett had been going on for at least 9 months. She'd charged 3 hotel stays to a credit card I hadn't paid close attention to, because she handled our household accounts, something I'd agreed 2 years ago, and she'd argued it was more efficient. I'd thought it was a reasonable division of labor. I now understood it as an access problem I'd created for myself. I also learned through Stuart that my wife had met with a divorce attorney 4 months ago. A consult only, but still. She'd been planning the exit before I'd even known there was a fire. That hit harder than the affair itself somehow. The affair I could almost understand. People are weak, marriages drift. I wasn't blameless in the distance between us, but the planning, the premeditation. She'd been sitting across from me at dinner, sleeping in our bed, asking about my projects, watching our son's baseball games, all while quietly measuring how to dismantle everything we'd built. I spent one very bad weekend with that information. Then I put it away and got back to work. My son, Bryce, was 17 and in his junior year. He was the fixed point in all of this. Whatever happened with his mother and me, I was not going to blow up his life during junior year. I was going to do this right, or I was going to do it quietly, but I was not going to do it in a way that Bryce would spend the next decade processing in therapy. Stuart helped me understand the financial picture. We were in a community property state, the marital home, both retirement accounts, her partnership stake in the firm, all of it would go into the calculation. But the fact that she'd been hiding a credit card and conducting an affair while simultaneously consulting a divorce lawyer created a different kind of leverage. She's going to claim the marriage was already over, Stuart told me. That the affair was a symptom, not the cause. Her attorney will argue she was emotionally checked out long before she acted on it. And what do we argue? That she was actively deceiving you while making financial decisions that benefited her position in a potential divorce. That changes the conversation. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning in October. Bryce was at a tournament 3 hours away, spending the night with his travel team. The house was ours. She was making coffee when I came downstairs with my laptop. I sat down at the kitchen table, same table where I'd sat in the dark 6 weeks earlier, and I opened the folder I'd prepared. Printed copies organized by date, hotel receipts, credit card statements, screenshots I'd taken of that original message, the photo, the thread that followed. I slid the first page across the table. She looked at it. The coffee maker gurgled behind her. She didn't say anything for a long moment. How long? I asked. She put her mug down slowly. Frank, how long? She closed her eyes. About a year. And the divorce attorney you saw in June? Her eyes opened. That surprised her, that I knew about that. I was trying to figure out my options, she said, while we were still married. While we were still going to Bryce's games together and having dinner with the Hendersons and pretending everything was fine. The marriage wasn't fine, Frank. You know that. I know we had problems. I don't know how problems become a secret credit card and a man named Garrett. She sat down across from me. And I'll give her this. She didn't cry. She didn't perform shock. She didn't try to rewrite the story in real time. She just looked at me with something that was almost relief. I didn't know how to get out, she said. You could have talked to me. I tried, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. You were always in the middle of a project, always just finishing something up. I stopped trying. I thought about that. She wasn't entirely wrong. The Meridian Bridge contract had consumed 18 months of my life. The year after that, we'd moved my mother into a care facility, and I'd handled most of that alone. I'd been present in the house, but absent in the marriage, and I'd told myself it was temporary. It's always temporary, until one day it isn't. That still doesn't explain the planning, I said. You weren't trying to fix anything. You were building an exit. She didn't argue with that. What happens now? She asked. Now we do this without destroying Bryce's junior year. After June, we file. You've already talked to an attorney. I have. She looked at the folder again. And those? Copies. Stuart has the originals. She understood what that meant. I wasn't threatening her. Not exactly. I was telling her that I wasn't unprepared, that the husband she'd expected to blindside had, somewhere along the way, stopped being blindsidable. I'm not trying to punish you, I said, and I meant it. I want to be fair, but fair means both of us are honest about what this is. She nodded slowly. Okay. We live in that house for 8 more months. Civil. Careful. We told Bryce together in late November after his season ended, in the living room on a Sunday afternoon. I'd thought about how to have that conversation for weeks, mapped it out, anticipated questions. What I hadn't anticipated was how steady she would be in that moment. Whatever her failures as a wife, she was a good mother, and she held it together for him in a way I respected. Bryce cried. Then he got angry. Then he asked if this was about something he'd done. Nothing you did, I said. Nothing at all. This is about your mom and me, and it has nothing to do with how much we both love you. He looked at his mother. Is there someone else? She glanced at me. I didn't move. Yes, she said. And I'm sorry. I handled a lot of things badly. He didn't speak to her for 2 weeks after that. I told him he was allowed to be angry, but not allowed to be cruel, and to his credit, he eventually came around. 17-year-olds are more resilient than we give them credit for, or maybe more exhausted by adult drama than we realize. The formal mediation began in February. Her attorney, a sharp woman named Price who specialized in high-asset divorces, led with a proposal that would have left me refinancing the house I'd helped pay for over 20 years, while she walked away with her partnership stake largely intact. The logic was that her career had appreciated significantly during our marriage, and the partnership represented her professional contribution, separate from marital assets. Stuart let her finish. Then he opened his folder. My client has some concerns about the financial transparency of this marriage, he said pleasantly. Specifically, the undisclosed credit card used for personal expenses over the past 18 months, and the fact that your client consulted with a divorce attorney while still managing the couple's joint finances. Price didn't flinch, but something shifted. Furthermore, Stuart continued, we have documentation of an ongoing extramarital relationship that began while financial decisions were being made, that materially affected my client's equity position. My wife was looking at the table. We're prepared to litigate the full financial disclosure, Stuart said, which would become a matter of public record, including any depositions. A deposition would mean Garrett, his name, his existence, in documents that could be accessed by anyone, including opposing counsel in any future legal matter she might be involved with professionally. Price asked for a recess. In the hallway, I stood by a window and looked at the parking garage across the street. Stuart came out 5 minutes later. She wants to talk settlement. We settled 3 weeks after that. The house went to sales, split down the middle after the mortgage. Retirement accounts divided equally. The partnership stake she kept, but we structured the settlement so that a percentage of any future buyout over a defined threshold came back to the marital pool. Stuart called it elegant. I called it fair. No spousal support either direction. We'd both been working throughout the marriage. We were both capable adults. That part was easy. What wasn't easy was the day we signed the papers. We sat in a conference room with our respective attorneys and signed page after page, while a paralegal shuffled documents. When it was done, she and I walked to the elevator together, just the two of us, and she said, I really am sorry, Frank. I know that doesn't fix it. I know you are, I said. Are we going to be able to do this? For Bryce? We already are, I said. That's the part that still works. The elevator doors opened and we went our separate ways. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the same school district so Bryce could finish senior year without changing schools. It was a good apartment, 3rd floor with a view of the park. I bought a couch I actually liked for the first time in 15 years. My wife had strong opinions about furniture, and I'd spent a decade and a half sitting on things that photographed well but weren't comfortable. My new couch was enormous and slightly ridiculous, and I loved it. For the first 3 months, I worked and I ran, and I occasionally went out with Stuart for dinner and didn't talk about the divorce. My firm offered me a project lead on a new pedestrian bridge in Pittsburgh. Significant work, the kind of project that required full attention. I took it. I needed something to pour myself into that wasn't grief. Bryce stayed with me every other week and most weekends when he didn't have commitments. We cooked badly together and watched too much football, and he helped me figure out the new apartment's Wi-Fi setup in about 4 minutes while I stood there looking useless. He seemed okay. Not fine exactly. He was quieter than he used to be, and I'd notice him watching his mother and me sometimes at pickup or drop-off with this careful, measuring look that made me sad. But he was managing. Kids figure out how to manage. About 4 months after the divorce was final, I was at a planning commission meeting for the Pittsburgh project, one of those interminable public comment sessions where you sit at a table for 3 hours while people express opinions about sidewalk materials. And I met the city's liaison for the project. Her name was Audrey. She was direct, in the way that people who've spent years navigating bureaucratic nonsense tend to be direct. Which is to say, she didn't waste words, and she had no patience for the parts of the meeting that were theater. Afterward, in the parking lot, she told me she thought my structural presentation was clear and that most engineers made it incomprehensible on purpose to avoid accountability. "Is that your theory?" I asked. 12 years working with engineers, she said. "It's a documented pattern." I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. We got coffee. Just coffee. A 45-minute conversation about the bridge and Pittsburgh's history of infrastructure projects and eventually, briefly, our respective lives. She'd been divorced for 3 years, 2 kids, both in college. She'd come out the other side and seemed, from what I could tell in 45 minutes, like someone who'd done the work of becoming okay. I wasn't ready to be anything more than friendly. I told her that, actually, which is not something I would have said a year earlier. Old Frank would have hedged and deflected. New Frank, apparently, just said the thing. "That's fine," she said. "I'm not looking for anything complicated either. But the coffee was good." It was. So maybe we do it again sometime. We did, several times over the following months, always casual, always easy. She never pushed for more than I had available, which meant she was either patient or simply not that interested, and either way it worked. By the time the Pittsburgh project wrapped and I came back to town full-time, I'd realized I'd been looking forward to those conversations more than I looked forward to most other parts of my week. I told Bryce about her before our first actual dinner date. He was 18 by then, about to leave for college, and he took the news with the philosophical shrug of a person who has more immediate concerns. "Is she nice?" he asked. "Yeah. She's direct. Honest. Calls things what they are." "Good." He went back to his laptop. "Those are good qualities, Dad." High praise from a teenager. His mother had been seeing someone too. A man from her professional network, quieter than Garrett, apparently more serious. I didn't ask for details and Bryce didn't offer them. We'd established that the particulars of each other's personal lives were not required information. We were co-parents. We were civil. On a good day, we were almost something like friendly, in the way that people who've survived something difficult together can be friendly, once the survival is no longer in question. The Pittsburgh Bridge opened in late spring. I stood on it the morning of the ribbon cutting and thought about structural load, about how the whole point of what I do is to build things that hold under pressure, not just expected pressure, but the kind you don't anticipate. The exceptional load. The stress event. Marriages are like that too, I suppose. The problem isn't the expected weight. It's the thing you didn't calculate for. The slow failure that happens in the joints, invisible, until one day the whole structure shifts and you realize the damage has been there for years. I don't know what I would have done differently. I've thought about it. I was absent in ways that mattered. I assumed stability where there was actually distance. I fixed things for a living and somehow missed that. The thing closest to me was coming apart. But I also know this. I didn't lie. I didn't plan an exit while pretending to stay. I didn't look my wife in the eye every morning and perform a marriage I'd already decided to leave. Whatever mistakes I made them as someone who was still trying. That has to count for something. The night the bridge opened, I had dinner with Audrey at a place she liked near the waterfront. She asked how the day had felt, actually asked, and listened to the answer the way people listen when they're genuinely curious instead of waiting for their turn to talk. I told her about the bridge, about load calculations and stress events, and the feeling of standing on something you built and trusting it to hold. "You trust it because you know how it was made," she said. "Exactly. Is that a metaphor?" "Maybe." She smiled over her wine glass. "You engineers. Everything's a system. It's not the worst way to look at things." She tilted her head. "No," she said. "It's actually not." Walking back to her car an hour later, I thought about what Stuart had asked me all those months ago when this was just starting. "You thought about what kind of man you want to be on the other side of this." I hadn't had an answer then. I do now. The kind of man who doesn't pretend things are fine when they aren't. The kind of man who does the hard thing carefully instead of the easy thing quickly. The kind who fixes what's worth fixing and knows, finally, the difference between the two. Bryce texted me that night from his dorm room, 3 hours away. "How was the bridge thing?" I typed back, "Good. Really good. Nice. Proud of you, Dad." I sat with that for a while. Outside, the city was doing what cities do. Lit up and indifferent and full of people carrying things you'd never know to look at them. Somewhere out there, my ex-wife was living a life that didn't include me. Somewhere Garrett was probably charming someone new, and here I was, in a city I'd come to for a job, feeling lighter than I had in years. Not happy exactly. Not yet, but something close enough to count. Something that felt, if I'm being honest, like the beginning of fine. I've been an engineer for over 20 years, and the thing nobody tells you about that profession is that it teaches you to be honest about failure. You can't fudge the numbers. You can't wish a bad weld into holding. Either the structure works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, you find out why, not to assign blame, but because the truth is the only thing that actually helps. I think about that now when I think about my marriage. My wife didn't wake up one day and decide to become someone I didn't recognize. It happened slowly, in the spaces I wasn't paying attention to. The late nights I spent on the Meridian project while she sat alone in the living room, the conversations I kept putting off until after this deadline, the way I confused stability with connection and thought that because nothing was visibly wrong, everything must be fine. I built a structurally sound life, good income, nice house, solid routine, and somewhere inside it, my marriage quietly lost its load-bearing walls. That's not an excuse for what she did. Let me be clear about that. She chose deception over honesty. She chose to build an exit in secret instead of having a hard conversation in the open. She sat across from me at dinner for months knowing what she knew, and she let me believe we were still trying. That's a specific kind of cruelty, even when it comes from a person who isn't cruel by nature, and the consequences that followed. The settlement she didn't want, the social fallout, the damaged trust with Bryce, those came directly from that choice. Not from my anger, not from Stewart's strategy. From her own actions, catching up. That's how it works. Not as punishment handed down from somewhere above, but as simple cause and effect. The things we do in private shape the reality we live in public. She understood that, eventually. I saw it in her face the day we signed the papers. What I had to learn was my own version of the same lesson. Absence has consequences too. Neglect, even well-intentioned neglect, leaves a mark. I didn't lie to my wife. I didn't plan an exit. But I did spend years treating the marriage like infrastructure, something that, once built, maintains itself. It doesn't. Nothing does. Bryce texted me not long ago from college, just to check in. We talk more now than we did when we lived in the same house, which says something I don't have a clean explanation for. Maybe crisis clarifies what matters. Maybe I just finally stopped being too busy. Audrey asked me once what the hardest part of the past 2 years had been. I thought about it for a while before I answered. Realizing I'd been a good provider and a mediocre husband, I said, those aren't the same thing. She didn't try to talk me out of it, which is one of the things I respect about her. I'm not the same person who sat in the dark at that kitchen table holding a glass of scotch and trying to figure out what to do next. That man was waiting for the damage assessment. This version of me is more interested in what gets built going forward, and more honest, I think, about what it actually takes to build something worth keeping. The Pittsburgh Bridge is still standing. I drove over it last month and thought about load-bearing capacity, about what it means to design something with the exceptional stress in mind, not just the expected weight. That's the work, really. In engineering and in everything else, you find out what something's made of when the pressure comes. I found out what I was made of. I think I can live with the answer.